In this tutorial, we're going to look at simple table joins in QGIS. Table joins are useful when you have a table with lots of interesting data in it that you want to use, but the data is not geocoded, and you have a separate layer which tells you, at the very least, where things are, but may not necessarily contain the data that you want. So we're going to join two things together. In this case, the files that I'm going to use are some coastline data from Natural Earth, the settlements centroids from the National Records of Scotland, which essentially just gives you the location of various towns and villages and cities in Scotland. But that information there contains just the location and not even the names of those settlements. Separately, we're going to join this with a layer of population data, also from the National Records of Scotland. But this table, which is not geocoded, contains not just the populations, but the names. And like the centroids, it contains a column in common corresponding to a certain settlement code. So the exercise here is to join these two things together in QGIS. Once you've downloaded the layers, you can just drag them into QGIS. I'm going to do that for the settlement centroids and the coastlines. If you zoom in on Scotland here, you'll see that our various settlements have appeared. If you use the Identify Features tools, you can select any of these, and you'll see that we have a feature ID and we have a settlement code, and right now it's listed as easting and northing, and that is presumably because here we have the source data comes with is on the British National Grid that uses that. Our coastline, on the other hand, is in WGS 84. Okay, so now I want to bring in the data that contains those names. If I use this Add Delimited Text button over here and choose the downloaded population data, notice a couple of things here. If you see the sample data down here, we have a completely blank row. We have a settlement name, and then we have more header column information underneath. And then we have numbers that contain a comma here. If I were to import this in, there's no X and Y fee, so if I were to say no geometry, and if I were just to import this in, you would get the table, but opening its attribute table, first of all, will get you a couple of junk rows. But moreover, although it appears as numbers right here for the population, going to the properties and looking at source fields, you'll see how the various population columns have been imported as strings. That means that you can't perform calculations on it in any meaningful way. We want to make sure that the stuff gets imported as integers, numbers, instead of strings. So I'm going to remove this layer. What this essentially means is that before I can use this data in QGIS, I've got to clean it up. And I'm going to show you how to do that both in Microsoft Excel and in Apple Numbers. First, if I open this in Microsoft Excel, when I open this CSV file in Excel, the first thing I want to do to clean the data in order to bring it into QGIS is to make sure they only have one header row. So instead of having this double header row here, that went rather slow. And then I'm going to remove this row here. and I'm going to remove this blank row here, and I'm going to remove this one here. So now I have everything in the right header row. I'm also going to run into problems with these commas here. So I'm going to use a little trick in Excel to get rid of this. If I go up into the Format menu and choose Cells, if I do it here, okay, well, you go up to the Format menu, choose Cells, and I'm going to tell it that it's a number. And here we already have 1000 separator, but if I turn it on and then turn it off again and press OK, it gives me all the numbers without the commas. In fact, I don't want this to be real numbers, so I'm going to give it 0 decimal places. And that gets rid of all of the commas for us, which is quite handy. Okay, I'm going to save this. I want to save it as the CSV file, so leave it as CSV file and close it. Now, you can do the same thing in numbers. Well, I've already done it to this CSV file here. I'll just show you how you would go about that in numbers. It's already been cleaned up, but you can do the same kind of thing with deleting the rows as needed. And you could have selected the columns, go into cell, chosen number as the format, and turned off and on the separators with no decimals. So very similar kind of thing in Apple Numbers for those of you who are using that instead. Okay, so now I've cleaned up my CSV file and I want to import it into QGIS. So again, using this add delimited text layer, choosing the population data, indicating that it has no geometry, that is to say that it's not geocoded, that there's no point coordinates in here. And now if you look, this sample data down here is looking great. So let's just add that and close it. And now we have all of our data in here. Right-clicking and choosing Open Attribute Table will show you that it's showing up correctly. All right, so we have our settlements, which have nothing but the coding, but they have the location, and we have the population and the settlement names. So how do we get these two together? Essentially, we want to perform a join on this layer that's going to receive the information from the table. And to do this is really quite simple. You just go into Properties, go down to Joins, and then you add a new join. I'm going to join it to the table. And the join field and target field is basically your way of telling QGIS, here is the column that they have in common. In the case of our our join field in the statistics is settlement code. And in our very empty but location specific layer, it's the code. So these two columns contain the same thing. And we're basically asking us to import all the stuff from the table where this equals this. We press OK. Now look what happens if I go back into the attribute table here. You can see now that it has imported the names of these various places as well as the populations. Now if I use my Identify Features tool and I choose this, in addition to just getting an ID number, I also get the name of the places. Okay, this is cached in memory now. And I always recommend that if you're doing some kind of join or pretty much anything in QGIS, a safe rule of thumb is to then go in and save your layer as a shape file. Okay, so if I wanted to, I could delete these two layers, but essentially now we have a saved layer that is no longer joined to the table. If we go back into the properties and look at joins, there's no longer any join. So whereas this layer and this layer are kind of temporarily merged with each other within QGIS, we've now made it permanent in this new layer that we've created. You're now set up for our next exercise, which is going to do buffer and intersect.